Hey, deserving listeners, in preparation for the current season of 90 Day Fiancé, I'm going back in time and watching Kenny and Armando. I know a lot of you have emailed me asking that I watch this couple, and I'm excited to see what is up with them. Let's watch.
I love doing this with you guys.
Me too.
Being a dad has been nothing but a blessing to me. My family has always been very important in my life. I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. I had a very happy, normal childhood.
All right, so we're learning about his childhood, which is good, at least a summary. He's saying, I had a very happy and normal childhood. That tells us that he was likely not traumatized to a significant extent, if at all, and or his life, because we've seen this before, where, and I've seen it in my office as well with clients, is that some people will have a narrative about their childhood being great when it actually wasn't that great. So let's see if we see any evidence along those lines, which one it is.
My dad was a head football coach for 40 years, and I wrote an 8-page letter to them. And then I got a call, and the first words, my mom said, "Don't worry about it, you're fine."
Well, that is heartwarming. I'm so glad for Kenny in that way. So what are we hearing? We're hearing that I think this is early mid 80s, I'm guessing, and he leaves Ohio, goes to Florida to find himself, goes to a gay bar and feels at home for the first time, which is a common experience for people, especially back then when you were only allowed, quote unquote, allowed to be gay in these very small pockets, often at gay bars or, in people's homes, this kind of thing. And to just feel like you could just be yourself for the first time in your life, that feeling would be euphoric to people for obvious reasons. And just a crime upon humanity that we would do this to people. It's just so illogical, and that it's still happening in my society and particularly around the world. It's just so illogical. It just doesn't make, there are things that I get that we hold as values, like don't murder, don't lie, don't steal. These things make sense to me. It's harming other people when you steal, when you murder, when you lie. Being gay, it doesn't harm anyone. And yet so many people consider this to be high sin, high immorality, high lack of values, this kind of thing. And it just boggles the mind. Anyway, so he came out to his parents, wrote an 8-page letter, was terrified. Mom, devout Catholic, dad, football coach for 40 years, and really worried. And then mom says that everything's okay, which was rare back then. As someone who grew up in the 70s and 80s, I can tell you that for anyone, parents particularly, to be cool with it was rare. So he lucked out there. And what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the parents are, what does it tell us about people? I think what does it tell us about people, actually? That's interesting to think about. Because over time, in my lifetime, I've seen people change. That the majority of people in the United States, I can't remember the stat, but a poll in the 90s, 80s was, are you in support of gay marriage? And it was something like, 20, 30% or something. And then at some point it changed, and now it's 70, 80%. I can't remember the stat, but a lot of Americans have changed over time. And there's been a lot of reasons for that. One is activism. When gay people and allies, LGBTQIA people and their allies, picket or tweet or demand or make art or push their agenda, which is to be seen and heard and treated fairly and not murdered, literally, then things change. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. But those people who are hearing that, the parents who hear it, it's I'm sure that there's a lot of analysis about this, but I'm just trying, my experience, because I've seen a lot, I've worked with families with LGBTQIA kids or family members, and I've been there as the parents are faced with that information, and I've seen a lot of different reactions. Some parents are cool with it. Some parents are kind of cool with it. Some parents are not cool with it. Some parents don't seem to know what to do with it. Some parents say, I always knew and I've always loved you. I've just been waiting for you to tell me. So there's a lot of different reactions. And we kind of saw that in the Stephanie and Erica storyline, right? They both came out to their parents. There were different reactions. Erica's parents were cooler than Stephanie's was, but I think Stephanie's mom was okay. Anyway, point is that what does it say about people? Because, you're Catholic, and there's, especially back then, there were explicit messages that gay people were sinning and going to hell, literally, and that to support that, there would be, something deeply wrong with you. And you might go to hell if you support that, or at least you'll be condemned, or bad things will happen to you, whatever, or shunned by the community. So what is it about that your parents, particularly your mom, goes against that? And the majority of society wants you to condemn your child. Your family wants you to condemn your child. Your religion, the political structure wants you to condemn your child and reject them and try to get them to change. So what does it take in someone? Is it influence? Did they have other contact with LGBTQ people that got them to pre-question it before the son comes out? Had you noticed things in your son that made you wrestle with these things earlier on so that you were prepared? Are you just, to me, this is my thought about it, because, I'm heterosexual and cisgender and grew up with all that propaganda in the 70s and 80s. I had gay friends, but I didn't know they were gay. They wouldn't tell me until later on. Well, they didn't tell anyone until later on. And then I found, I had really good friends that were gay. And when I was in college, I started to meet people who were out. And I remember instantly, so the very first time I remember meeting someone was a bisexual person, a friend of mine. And I just remember thinking, I'm supposed to think there's something wrong with you, but that doesn't make any sense. It was the first time that I had been faced with that, because in the 80s, I don't remember there being many. There was a depiction of a gay person in Soap by Billy Crystal, a TV show, a sitcom. And I remember that, maybe that influenced me a little bit. There were other minor depictions, like Jack Tripper was acting like he was gay on Three's Company. And I don't think that was a very fair depiction. I think if we look back on that, it would be fairly homophobic, using gay people as the joke, this sort of thing, which was very common back then and still kind of common now. We're getting better for sure. I mean, my goodness, the changes that I've seen in movies and TV, even over the past 10 years. The podwife, Stacy, at night, the way she chills out before she goes to bed is she watches Friends, because it's always on. And Nickelodeon, I think, it's just 24/7 Friends. I think it's SpongeBob by day, Friends by night, as far as I can tell. And so sometimes I'll watch it with her, and there are some homophobic, heterosexist jokes on that show. It is unpleasant. But of course, back then, most people wouldn't have thought of it that way, and so we've changed, which is good. Anyway, point is that I met someone who was bisexual, and within half a second, all of the brainwashing that I had been internalized, I rejected in an instant. I remember just being like, I'm supposed to hate you, but that's stupid, right? Yeah, that's dumb. Like, that's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. So was it that in the parents? Was it their love for him that overcame the propaganda and the brainwashing? I don't know. Maybe they'll get into it, but I think it's a question that people have obviously mulled over for decades, because we need to move society forward in this way. That, like, for example, when you become a patron to this podcast, a portion of your pledge goes towards various charities that we support, including the Trevor Project, which is a charity designed to help LGBTQIA youth with their depression and suicide issues, because society and families and friends and schools and workplaces will oppress and put them down and be violent with them. They can often internalize this and want to take their own life because life is just so hopeless. And so the Trevor Project is set up to help people in situations like that, and has literally saved people's lives. And so we need to figure out how to change that. And the way we're going to change that mainly is by changing the minds of the oppressor, of the politicians, of the family members, of the workplace, of, just people down the street, of religious people. And how do we do that, right? And again, I know people have been mulling that over for a long time, but so anyway, we're hearing that for Kenny, his parents were cool with it, which is just wonderful to hear.
More than today, and you had to be married. I've always wanted to be a father, so nothing was gonna stop me. And a friend of mine offered to have a child for me. So we had to fake being married, and no, I didn't tap that.
So another thing that was worried about was that, well, what if two gay men raise children? There's no mom. There's all this panic around that, and there still is, again, particularly around the world. And it doesn't make any logical sense, but we didn't know until we looked at the data, and the data shows clearly that it does not matter the gender of the parents. It doesn't matter. You do not need a quote-unquote mom. You do not need a quote-unquote dad. You need parents and caregivers, parents and or caregivers who care about you, who love you, who give you food, who give you safety, who give you attention, attunement, love, hugs, hangout time, smiles, playtime, all that stuff. And that, of course, has nothing to do with gender. But somehow we get it into our heads that there needs to be a certain gender configuration in our caregivers. The data and the science just does not show that at all.
Be there just walking down the street with Armando.
That's, Armando has a lot to deal with that too, to come to terms with all that as well. Armando's really worried because his parents, they're not accepting of him. So they haven't, over the last 4 years, they've hardly even talked about him being gay.
All right, so we're learning that for Armando, it's different than for Kenny. For Armando, his parents have rejected him because he is gay, and they haven't talked very much. So that makes me sad for Armando, for sure. And by the way, for those young people out there in the United States, particularly, or in societies, Western societies that have progressed to become much more, not entirely accepting of LGBTQ people, it might be hard for you to imagine what I'm talking about. You might have grown up with LGBTQ people in your family, or in cartoons that you watched, or in your school, or teachers. And that was not the case back in the day. For me, and for many people in at least the United States, 70s and 80s, it was so wrong, so to speak, to be LGBTQ, that people couldn't even come out and weather the storm, if you will, at least in my town. You couldn't even think about, and for many people, they wouldn't even accept that they were that way, because the consequences were so dire to them. Literally, murder could be around the corner if you identified that way. And it was basically, your life was over in so many ways. And that's why incidence of suicide is so much higher for people, particularly in the past, but still, honestly. And so it might be hard to imagine that. You might be thinking, like, why was it so hard for me why did I have that moment in college where I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to hate you? Because for you grew up, I remember when I was about like 30 or 28 years old, I remember I was a therapist and I was working with families and adults and couples, and I had some kids and teenagers, and I was so encouraged when I would hear about from the clients that I was working with that they knew out people, LGBTQ people, in their school, or they themselves were LGBTQ and were allowed to be that way, felt supported enough so that they could come out of the closet at the age of 15, at the age of 13, at the age of 17. And I thought, wow, things have changed in 10 years. Why is that? Well, it's because we did something about it. We spoke up, we marched, we tweeted, we yelled, we voted. That's how we change our society. It's not something that happens naturally. We have to do something about it. It's advocacy. It's social justice warriors doing things, fighting the good fight. So we can pat ourselves in the back for doing that. Obviously, I had a small, very small part in that, but I did advocate throughout my adult life and have used this podcast along those lines as well. Obviously, other people have done a billion times more than I have. But the point is that wherever we are at, our society can change. And that is done through advocacy, through voting, through speaking out. And so the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, the other thing that's happening right here is for Kenny, he is talking about the loss that he's going to experience by being away from his children and his grandchild. So let's see how that goes.
The hardest part about my dad going to Mexico, it's kind of like I'm losing my entire support system because he's always been there for me and Cooper.
Another good sign that Kenny is securely attached with his parents and was raised well, that he would also have an attachment with his daughter and grandson, such that the daughter is talking about how much he means to her and her family's life. It's just something we don't often see is the pain, and we see it sometimes for sure, but the pain that people go through when they have to move. And I guess it's good to see that they're able to talk about that. It is a huge sacrifice for everyone. It's not just a sacrifice for Kenny, but also for his family.
Abandoning me and Cooper, you've always been here, and
It's not abandoning you. It's not that.
you're not gonna be able to physically play with him and kiss him and hug him. And
Yeah, it's going to be rough for everyone, obviously. And for the daughter, she's always had her dad there. And for Cooper, the grandson, has always had, Kenny there for. So yeah, that's going to be a huge loss for them for sure.
Being away from my family, that's going to be very difficult for me because I love them very much. We're very close. I've never moved and left them behind. It is going to be hard.
And often what we see on this show is not this sort of scene. We see xenophobia on behalf of the family members where they will say, what are you going to do in that disgusting country? Or you're bringing that, questionable person from another country who just wants the green card and is just trying to take your money and take our gerbs. And we don't see that here. I've often wondered, why do we see that? Well, obviously propaganda and brainwashing from, political circles and echo chambers, social media, can cause people to have ideas about foreigners that are not accurate. And there's that. But I think it's also motivated by, this. Underneath it all is this fear of loss and of pain of loss. And also feelings of abandonment. I don't know if I showed that clip, but she said, it feels like you're abandoning me. And he's like, I'm not abandoning you. I'm living my life. I found someone that I'm in love with, and he can't leave Mexico because he has a small child. I think that's the crux of the matter, is that for Kenny, all of his children have moved out, are adults. For Armando, he still has a young child, and I don't know, but I wonder if the child also is with the mom, the biological mom, and so Armando can't bring the child over. I don't know. Anyway, it seems maybe that's why Kenny is going the other way, or they just really want to live in Mexico. So the daughter is saying that she feels abandoned, and I wonder if a lot of these other families that we see on the show feel the same way. They feel abandoned, they feel hurt, they feel rejected, they feel like they're going to lose someone, and they're sad about that. But they don't know how to communicate that. They might not even know that's really what's happening for them, and they just feel anger, and they find a scapegoat. It's like, well, I know I can utilize this societal notion of xenophobia and racism in otherism to manifest all of my difficult feelings, and it feels safer to do that than to be vulnerable. So this is another example, I don't know, maybe it'll turn out differently, showing us that for Kenny and the children and the grandchild and Kenny's parents, that they are on the differentiated side of things, that they're able to be vulnerable. And we've seen vulnerability in Kenny and the daughter, just flat out crying because they're sad. It's healthy to do that. And I wonder if we'll see more evidence of that. Or, I mean, all y'all have been asking me to watch this couple for a while. And so I'm wondering if things get real nasty between Kenny and Armando. I don't know.
I want you to be happy, and I know Armando makes you happy, and I'm really glad that he makes you happy. I just wish that it wasn't so far away.
I know. Well, no matter what, I'm always there.
As you know, I'm often advocating that people cry when they want to, and that I'm often railing about how our society and individuals will have these notions of don't cry, or crying is for the weak, or stop crying, or, in situations where it's like, of course you would cry. And to me, it's as illogical as going to a comedy show and people are laughing and yelling at people for laughing. That's what you're there to do. You're feeling an emotion, and you have this involuntary physical reaction, which goes along with that emotion, which of course makes sense. We're humans, we're emotional creatures. And so when we are sad, we cry a lot, or we cry in a lot of situations, but again, particularly when we're sad. And so I'm often just advocating for that and very angry at our society for suppressing that in a variety of ways, to the point where I will have to deprogram my students who will be in class, and we sometimes get into some personal things or things that are scary or hurtful to them as students in their life, or they're just stressed out, and they'll start crying, and almost all the time, 9 out of 10 times, they'll apologize. They'll be, oh, I'm sorry for crying. And I'm thinking, if therapists, we're all therapists here, you students, me, if therapists can't cry without apologizing, we have something deeply wrong with our society, deeply wrong. So, and, I will say stuff like that, and yet I will still see students who will hold back tears, or they will, and, of course, if you don't want to cry, it's fine, but often it's because people don't want to embarrass themselves, and they also don't want to embarrass other people. They don't want to impose on other people. They're also worried that, almost all the time when people will cry, they'll say, I'm sorry for taking up so much time. And I'm like, that's why you're here. We're here to help you develop as a therapist, which means helping you with your emotions, and by modeling for all of us that you can have emotions and it's not a threat. That's always the thing to me of like, when someone's crying, it's not a threat, you understand? Like if someone's crying, it doesn't harm you. If someone else is crying, it doesn't harm you. 99.9% of the time, they're just crying. It's fine. It's the same way if someone was laughing. If you're watching a TV show and they're laughing at something on the TV show, it doesn't threaten you. They're having an emotional experience and they're having a physical reaction. Same with crying. So I am glad that we're seeing crying. And what else can we say about this scene about crying? Well, often what I am saying about crying is the reason why we evolved crying, in all likelihood, it's impossible for us to know why we evolved crying precisely. But to me, the strongest hypothesis is that we, similar to laughing, when we cry and we convulse, because it's very noticeable when people are crying. Your eyes are watering, you snot, you convulsing, your breathing is different, you're buckled over, your breathing is off. It's very obvious. And why would we do this? And there's all these theories that just make no sense to me, like you're trying to get rid of toxins through your tear ducts. It's ridiculous. Maybe there's a minor secondary beneficial effect to that. But the main reason, obviously, to me, is we're signaling to other people what our emotional state is. We are telling other people. The body says, I don't care if you consciously or unconsciously want to do this, you're going to do this. And the reason why you're going to do this is because people in your tribe need to know that you're sad, need to know what you're feeling so that they can help you. So because our survival depends on dependency. We depend on each other. We do not exist in a vacuum. We cannot survive in isolation. Not only do we need other people pragmatically with food and shelter and this sort of thing, but emotionally we evolved to be extremely dependent on each other. And so we have all these ways of signaling to each other our emotions. Think about, that's why when we are trying to educate people about emotions, we show faces. We don't ask them. We just say, point to the face that you feel, and people will point, oh, I'm angry, and they'll point to that one. Or I'm disgusted, they'll point to that. Why do we do? Well, it's because our faces evolved this ability to communicate what's happening on the inside of us. And so with crying, it's the same thing. Now, why would we need that? Well, in situations like this, when you are feeling sad, Kenny, he's talking about this too, so we know he's sad about leaving his family and his grandson. He feels guilty about it. He feels loss. He feels sorry for that. He feels bad about it. He feels worried about it, and he is crying uncontrollably. It's uncontrollable, which is, normal for us. And what does that do? Well, what it does for the daughter is it signals to her, oh, my father cares that much. My father feels it. It feels the sadness and feels my sadness and feels a similar sadness. We're both feeling, I'm crying. We're feeling the same sadness. I can only know that if he is crying and by the degree he is crying. If he didn't cry, which often happens on the show, people will not, if Angela would only cry more often, honestly. But if he didn't cry and he was just saying the words like, yes, I'm not abandoning you. Yes, I feel bad about leaving you. It wouldn't have the same impact. It's just words. We're not affected by words the way we are affected by emotional expressions. So it helps to download your experience into other people so that they can accurately know what was happening, which often will save the day. Because if the daughter doesn't know Kenny, the father, is sad, then it'll really hurt her and she will have more pain, more defenses. Whereas if he just bawls his eyes out, as he's doing in a healthy way, then it solves the whole problem. Does that make sense to people? It's important that you cry. And I know a lot of you have emailed me or commented about this sort of thing. And I hope you're all on that journey, or you have reached the end where you cry as often as Kenny does. If only we could all cry as often as Kenny does, because we're sad a lot of the times. We're worried a lot of the times. We're inspired, to tears often. If we could all be like that, we wouldn't have to spend so much time trying to help other people understand how we feel, because it would be so clear. And not only do we evolve the tear ducts and the convulsing, because just think about how weird it is to cry. It doesn't help us, right? It's, the breathing and the snot and the tears, it's illogical. It's a very obvious, we evolved it very obviously to communicate involuntarily against our will, particularly for infants, right? Because they can't speak at that point. But not only do we evolve that, but we evolved the flip side of that coin, which is the receptiveness to that. When we see someone else crying, we feel it. If we're not a psychopath, we feel it. We're like, and we start to cry. Like when you watch this show and you see people crying, you might cry with them. Why is that? Because we evolved this mirror neuron, this empathy mechanism that we're like, I feel, when I watch YouTube videos, fail videos, and someone falls, I feel the pain in my body. It's like, why is that? Because we're social creatures. And in order for us to understand each other, we have to communicate our feelings effectively and feel other people's feelings effectively so that we can all work together and understand each other. Because when we misunderstand each other, as often happens on the show, then we have bigger hurts that aren't reflective of what's really happening. So good on Kenny for just letting her rip.
I'm never, ever going to leave you up here or in here. I mean that.
I love you.
I really do.
And I want to cry. I'm getting a little teary watching it. It's beautiful to see. It's nice to see just pure, good, normal emotion. He's fallen in love with someone that apparently can't leave their country, and he has to go, and he has to leave his children and his grandchild that he's never been apart from before, and everyone is sad, and that's, it's expected and healthy to feel his feelings, and healthy to express, healthy to talk it out, healthy to hug it out afterwards. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.